those listening and watching, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our format for our time together. So we are going to have 4 questions followed by a rapid fire section. What this will mean is we'll have opportunities for around 16 questions where the candidates can only say yes, no, or pass to some great stances and ideas. We would love to get some answers around to see where you line up. What we're going to be doing with those 4 questions is we'll have 15 minutes total. So we'll be able to kick it to one of you for 2 minutes and then the other person for 2 minutes, and then we'll have some open discussion. I'm going to do my best to follow up with you about some topics that I think are really interesting that I know our Black owners are going to want to hear about. But then there's also an opportunity for us to kind of dive a little bit deeper just generally about some of the things that are happening. Let's get into question 1 because I'm very, very excited about this. Candace, we're going to go to you first. So in 2020, thousands of people marched and protested in the city of Portland, demanding racial justice. Some protesters called for police reform, while others called for defunding to drastically shrink the size of the police budget. Others called for complete abolition. Nearly 4 years later, some elected officials still think of police response when they hear the phrase public safety. We at Imagine Black, we believe this definition is just really too narrow. So I want to ask first, what is your definition of community safety? And what are your plans to reimagine public safety? And I'll go to you for 2 minutes, Candace.
Sounds good. Well, there are many ways to define it, but I think what's most important to me about community safety is that our communities are safest when they're resourced. And that is a lot of what my platform speaks about, and it connects to all of the areas of our community, whether that's housing and homelessness, addressing, entrepreneurship, infrastructure and transportation, environmental justice for sure. And so to me, a community is safe when people feel connected to each other, when they have the resources to survive and be able to provide for their families. And then, when you have help or when you need help, you need somebody to respond to that, right? So there are various ways that we can enhance our modern public safety system to respond to different needs and ensure that East Portlanders in particular are getting the right response at the right time. I know we'll be talking a little bit more about Portland Street Response, which is definitely one of my ways that I would define a good solution to improving our community safety. But overall, I think that, we need to ensure that the city, who is responsible for building what I like to say hard infrastructure, and that's things like ensuring that our streets are safe, that they're walkable, that they're paved. Unfortunately, East Portland has very few paved streets, very few sidewalks. These are basic things and systems that we need to ensure that people can get from one place to the other safely, they can meet their family members safely, that they have a place that they can build community. So that's when it comes into things like having parks, making sure that we're giving small businesses opportunities to grow their business. Many East Portlanders are from immigrant families, refugee families, and they come to this country and have created, they've used the resources of East Portland to build their family, and yet we have not done enough to provide that in East Portland. So I know I'm almost out of time, but I think that's the high level of what I see as community safety. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Next, we're going to pass it on to you. You have 2 minutes.
Sure. I agree throughout Oregon and throughout the country, what we see is that the most well-resourced communities are the safest. And I also agree that, it is unfortunate that when some candidates speak about public safety, they do speak about it very narrowly. My perspective is that public safety is very comprehensive. It means people have the rights and resources and access to be able to thrive and live fulfilling lives. And so when I think about it, I think about, the city's role. And so, for example, things like shade with the recent heat domes, East Portland has some of the highest fatality rates. Things like safe routes to school, access to food, park access. East Portland is park deficient in a lot of ways, both in the number of parks and also, the safe access to the parks. And then we continue to have challenges around vacant land, which we know, based on the evidence, contributes to gun violence and things like this. So for me, I really see the challenges in East Portland stemming from historic underinvestment and ultimately a lack of political representation. And the effect of that is that East Portland's life expectancy is 10 years less than people living west of 82nd Avenue. And part of the reason for that is, there's never been people on council who have had to be accountable to East Portland's health outcomes. People on council have not had gunshots outside their door. And so that, to me, is partly why I'm running, is I want to be accountable to East Portland's health outcomes. And how I define success as an elected official is have we reduced those disparities between people living east and west of 82nd Avenue, and have we increased East Portland's life expectancy? So that's kind of on a broad view how I view some of these things. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's dive a little bit into East Portland in particular. There has been quite a lot of attention, I would say, in the media around gun violence in particular. I also know, for the folks, again, listening and watching, I hope you know, but if you don't know, we have a new form of government coming up, and what excites me most about this new structure is allowing for our counselors to really focus on policy instead of being so in the weeds on administration. So I'm curious a little bit from like a policy lens. Is there anything that you are really interested in pushing, or something that connects a little bit to those values that I heard both of you mention, especially as it relates to kind of helping East Portland, like this narrative that there's a lot of gun violence. In particular, I think there's a narrative that's primarily in the Black community. I have some thoughts about that, but yeah, I'll pass it to you, Candace. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those policy ideas may be?
Yeah, for sure. There's so much I want to say, and I'm trying to narrow it down. But I think one thing I'll mention is that as part of my work at Verde, we are in a coalition that receives some federal dollars in Cali to reimagine public safety. And part of those discussions are around, again, some of this infrastructure work that we're trying to do in Cali. But also, I think there is a very common and harmful misconception that people of color don't want emergency services, that they don't need support in those moments. And at some times that does require a police response, right? And so, but what we also know is that too often, a response by police ends up in some other harmful way for our community, right? And so I think in a modern time where not only have our social issues become greater due to rampant wealth inequality, due to greed, corporate greed, and just our systems being really deteriorated, we also need to ensure that we're meeting people's needs with a responder that is going to have a specialty in that area and is going to be able to resolve the issue and not create more issues, which is what we've seen. So I think part of why I'm bringing that up, and you're asking about policy, I think there are decisions we can make about how we allocate our dollars. How are we meeting different types of needs on the streets with a different response, like Portland Street Response, like the chat program that the fire program has. And then overall, I think we are trying to, being district based is gonna help us understand our communities better, and that is gonna inform the kind of policies that I make.
Thank you. I'll pass it to you, same question. Any ideas around policy?
Sure. I'll kind of start with a brief observation of East Portland. I managed projects there like paving and curb ramps and sidewalks, and we had one project that lasted a year, and during the course of that construction on that project site on 136th Avenue, there were 3 instances of gun violence. And when you go to these intersections, what I see as an individual is you look around and that the curb ramps aren't what they should be. The street lighting is deficient. There's a lack of trees. And statistically, what we've noticed too is that the areas where traffic fatalities occur are often the same exact locations where gun violence occurs in East Portland. And so that's kind of an observation that I have. And then in terms of policy, I think a number of things. One is, the gun violence prevention grants that go to communities on the ground that are working to address gun violence, either kind of specifically gun violence or just, teen programs or activation, whether that's, events and programming, things like that. Oakland has seen success with a voluntary gun buyback program that allows residents to turn in their guns. There's opportunities for violence interrupters, and then the city has a ceasefire program that provides kind of case management to people who are most at risk of gun violence and trying to intervene there. And then I also really see a role in terms of the city for place-based interventions, so things like trees and street lighting. You know, the city doesn't have the authority to make gun laws, and so I'm always focused on what is the city's role and how can the city have an impact in this world. And I think, as it relates to gun violence, I think place-based interventions are critical. And then really, my vision is that we're looking at this holistically, so not just like an Office of Violence Prevention, but really, you know, every single bureau has a role to play in gun violence, whether that is the Parks Bureau planting trees, whether that's PBOT, the Transportation Bureau, with lighting investments. And so that's really going to be my role, is like, what tools does each bureau has that plays a role and touches this? Because ultimately, you know, every single thing we can do, if it has an impact on addressing someone's life expectancy or health outcomes, it's totally worth it.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it back to Candace and expand upon a little bit more about these alternatives, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Then I also want to talk a little bit about this 2020 CRY, which was really focused a lot on the budget. And I know, Candace, I've considered you kind of a leader in the space of public safety for some time, whether it's through, I believe it was Oregonian, the series that you had, and other spaces through the city. I'm curious around how do we fund these alternatives that I hear both of you kind of mention, and how do we respond to community who really did cry for a different budget or a different budget process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know, in 2020, actually, I was running for city council at that point, and then the pandemic definitely changed the landscape. And then right after my primary, actually, a few days later was when George Floyd was murdered. And you know, leading up until that point, I was really one of the only candidates that was speaking about this issue, because I don't think enough people understand the intersectionality of our community safety issues as it relates to housing and environmental justice and all the other things that we're talking about. And so, yeah, I think that I'm trying to get back to what the question was, which I lost a little bit.
A little bit around the alternatives that you spoke about, reimagining, and ideas around kind of how to make that happen within the budget.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the reminder. And so I think what was happening in those calls was not only people wanting us to redirect dollars so into these other alternatives of community safety, but also really needing a critical eye on what the police budget was doing. Because here's the thing, the budget, it has a lot of police positions that are budgeted that they have not filled in many years. And I really am against holding our budget hostage and keeping it in a bureau that is not using it effectively, when we could be putting it towards things like Portland Street Response. And in general, making sure too, because a lot of times that money kind of becomes a bit of a slush fund, and they are using it to purchase more munitions. And I say this as somebody who was also the chair of the Crowd Control and Use of Force Work Group at that time, and we were analyzing the protest response, which is a whole other tangent that we could go down. But you know, it's really harmful, I think, that the city continues to not only increase that budget, they're taking it from general funding dollars, and then they're not using it. So why are we wasting money sitting somewhere in an account when we have real needs, like the kinds of solutions we've been talking about, violence interruptions, new first responders, things like that. So that's the kind of thing that I would advocate for.
Thank you. Same question for you. I'm curious your thoughts around how to fund and prioritize this within the budget. As folks know, and maybe they don't know, we love to say that, you know, the budget is a moral document. It is a policy document. It's how we actually move a lot of these ideas into action. You spoke of some great alternatives that you're interested in seeing us try out. What does this look like for the budget? Folks asked for a budget change at this time.
Sure. I think part of it is, you know, we have to look at the public safety budget holistically, and that includes like everything. And so one of the things I will be advocating for when I'm elected is programs like not only Portland Street Response, but the public safety support specialists, who are, for people who are unaware, those are unarmed members of the police bureau who have the opportunity to really play a greater role. I'll just provide one example. Yesterday, there was a major fire on 122nd Avenue yesterday. And there were a number of police officers, and they were directing traffic. And there were also some public safety support specialists who were kind of assisting in a more minor role directing traffic. And I think, that balance can be shifted a little bit. If we're saying we don't have the police resources, as some people are, then, why not have some of those tasks that, you don't need a gun to direct traffic. And so why can't we have the public safety support specialists address things like that? And then, so kind of like my biggest kind of how the lens that I view this is really defining the scope of the police. And so, and ultimately that ends up saving us money as taxpayers because, police are operationally and from a capital perspective, the most the highest cost. And so the more we can move toward other kind of responses or tools in that kind of continuum, I think the better off we all are.
Thank you so much. For folks listening and watching, I want to share a quick stat that I heard from our good friend Street Roots. They did a great article looking at the data of our Portland police, particularly diving in a little bit to the budget. Despite what you've heard, we have not defunded our police department. We've done quite the opposite. Anything that was reduced in 2020 came back, and not came back in a small way, but in a very, very drastic way. Our police budget is one of the largest budgets that we've ever seen in our Portland's history in terms of from this kind of subtle colonialist perspective. But the police budget right now is about $300 million. Just for context, in 2016, it was much smaller. We have seen a 42% increase. So it's 42% higher than it was in 2016. That's about $88 million that we've seen that increased since then. So we've not defunded. We've actually increased and funded quite a bit. And to your point earlier, there's still quite a lot of positions that are empty that could be used in other ways, that could be spread across. I want to get us to question 2. But before I do, I want to open it up just really quickly, with 2 minutes left on the clock, a quick minute to see if you have any last minute thoughts around the budget. If you have any thoughts, just opening it up around this cry in 2020 that I don't think our current elected officials have carried forward in this year. But quickly, anything else you want to add?
I agree with what Timur is saying about scope. That's a big part of it. And I think that if we're not looking at it holistically, then we're never going to be able to allocate the resources correctly. I'll leave it at that, and I'll say more on Portland Street.
Love it. Anything else you want to add before we move on?
I can incorporate my thoughts a little bit later too.
You all are making my job easy, and I like it.